The Vrexnath Dominion did not believe in mercy. It believed in monologues. High Admiral Zixtala, the unyielding devourer of the Kesari Reach, third of his molt, stood upon the command dais of the flagship, inevitable screaming of 1,000 suns, and let the silence stretch until it wept. Around him, 10,000 warships hung in formation like a plague of iron locusts, their hulls bristling with spines that had gutted 100 civilizations. Below the dais, 400 officers stood at attention, mandibles clamped shut, because the admiral was inhaling, and everyone knew what came after the inhale. 4,000 species, Zixtala began, his voice rolling through the cathedral vast bridge like distant thunder. 4,000 species have knelt before the Dominion. The crystal singers of Velith Prime. The hive lords of the amber spiral. The Kesari who believed their sun itself would shield them. He paused for effect. He was very good at pausing for effect. He had once paused for effect for 11 minutes, and 2 junior officers had quietly expired of old age before he resumed. And now, he continued, we turn our gaze to a small wet rock at the edge of nowhere. A species so young they have barely left their own moon. A species called. He consulted the glyph hovering beside him. Humans. A ripple of contemptuous clicking passed through the assembled officers, the Vrexnath equivalent of laughter. It was the sound of predators amused by prey. At the intelligence station, however, one officer was not clicking. Analyst Vrethka, 7th of her molt, hunched over her console with the posture of someone who has read something she cannot unread. She had spent 40 cycles studying the intercepted data streams from the human world, and 40 cycles slowly losing her grip on everything she understood about sapient life. The problem was the data itself. The Dominion's infiltration probes had been instructed to harvest humanity's most widely shared cultural transmissions, the material the species valued enough to copy billions of times. Logic dictated this would yield their military doctrine, their sacred texts, their deepest strategic thinking. Instead, Vrethka had received 11,000 hours of small-furred quadrupeds falling off furniture. She had received humans deliberately consuming a powdered spice called cinnamon and choking, filmed by their own companions who were laughing. She had received something labeled a Vine compilation, which she had watched 200 times and still could not determine whether it was comedy, prophecy, or a cry for help. And she had received, this was the part that kept her awake through her rest cycles, a single piece of music from the human year 1987, transmitted and retransmitted across their networks with such relentless, suspicious frequency that she had flagged it as a probable weapon. The artist was designated R. Astley. The composition was deceptively simple, and it did not leave. Vrethka had heard it exactly once 17 cycles ago, and it was still playing inside her skull, on loop at all hours, like a parasite made of joy. Never gonna give you up. She had begun humming it during briefings. 2 other analysts had caught the contagion from her humming. Containment had failed. Analyst Vrethka. The Admiral's voice snapped her upright. Your threat assessment. Enlighten the fleet. Vrethka's throat plates tightened. She had rewritten this report 9 times and every version sounded insane. High Admiral. The humans possess approximately 8,000 fission and fusion weapons. Firecrackers, Zixtala said, waving a claw. Which they built, Vrethka pressed on carefully, not to use against other species. They built them to point at each other. For 70 years. As a form of peacekeeping. They call it mutually assured destruction, and they consider it one of their more reasonable ideas. The clicking on the bridge faltered slightly. Furthermore, she said, their homeworld hosts an apex land predator, a pack hunter with crushing jaws called a wolf. The humans did not exterminate it. They befriended it. Selectively bred it over 15,000 years into hundreds of variants, some small enough to carry in garments. They allow these predators to sleep in their beds. They celebrate the anniversary of the predator's birth. With hats. That, said the Admiral, is the most pathetic thing I have ever heard. With respect, High Admiral, I initially concurred. But consider the implication. When a human encounters something dangerous, its first instinct is not fear. It is. She struggled for the word. There was no Vrexnath word for it. It is adoption. Zixtala descended from the dais, each footfall a soft boom, until he loomed over her station. Up close he smelled of old conquest, of scorched worlds and ritual oils. Analyst, are you suggesting the Dominion should fear a species that cuddles its predators? I am suggesting, High Admiral, that we do not understand them. And in 4,000 conquests, we have never once fought something we did not understand. 1 heartbeat, one single fragile heartbeat, Something ancient and cautious moved behind the Admiral's 6 eyes. Vrethka saw it. A flicker of the creature Zixthala had been before the titles, back in his first molt, when the void was still frightening and that fear had kept him alive. Then it was gone, buried under 10,000 years of Dominion certainty, and Zixthala did what all doomed empires do at the exact moment history offers them a door marked exit. He laughed. "Transmit the Declaration of Annihilation," he commanded, sweeping back to his dais. "Standard format. Give them the customary invitation to surrender, kneel, and offer up their world's treasures. Then we shall see what these wolf cuddlers are made of." The declaration went out, 40 minutes of formal threats, genealogies of conquest, and legally required monologue, compressed into a data burst and hurled across the dark toward the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. The reply arrived 11 hours later. It was not 40 minutes long. It was not 4 minutes long. It was a single image, and the entire bridge crew gathered beneath the main display to decode what was surely humanity's desperate plea for mercy. The image showed a human male in spectacles, squinting in evident confusion at a small winged insect. Overlaid text read, "Is this a threat?" Silence consumed the bridge of the inevitable screaming of 1,000 suns. "Is it code?" ventured the communications officer. "Run it through cryptographic analysis," snapped the tactical officer. They ran it through cryptographic analysis. The ship's war mind, an intelligence that had outthought the grand strategists of 4,000 worlds, chewed on the image for 6 full hours and finally returned a conclusion that would be studied in what remained of Vrexnath academies for generations. Assessment: the humans are making fun of us. Zixthala read the analysis 3 times. Something hot and unfamiliar crawled up his throat plates. In 4,000 conquests he had been feared, cursed, worshipped, and begged. He had never, not once, been mocked. He found he did not care for it. He found, in fact, that it made him want to skip several of the ceremonial phases of annihilation, which was itself deeply unprofessional. "All ships," he said quietly, and the quiet was worse than any roar. "Spool the jump drives. Course, the human homeworld. We will teach this species the price of laughter." Across 10,000 hulls, engines the size of cities began to burn. The fleet turned as one, dreadnoughts like armored leviathans, carriers trailing swarms of razor drones, the whole monstrous weight of an empire that had never lost, aimed at a small blue marble whose inhabitants at that exact moment were largely arguing online about whether a hot dog was a sandwich. Vrethka stayed at her station as the stars stretched into jump lines. She looked one last time at her threat report, the 10th draft, the honest one, the one she had never dared submit. It contained a single line of conclusion, and as the fleet leapt into the dark toward Earth, she read it again and felt the song in her skull swell like a prophecy. They domesticated the wolves. They tamed the lightning. They strapped themselves to explosions just to touch their moon, and when they got there they played games and left golf balls because even their conquests are jokes. Recommendation: do not make them laugh at us. A species that laughs at danger has already decided the danger is theirs to keep. Somewhere far ahead, on a small wet rock, a man put his boots up on a console, took a long sip of coffee, and watched the jump signatures bloom across his display like fireworks come early. "Well," said Commander Jack Reyes, smiling at 10,000 incoming warships, "somebody clicked the link." Earth's War Council did not meet in a bunker. It met in a repurposed NASA cafeteria in Houston, because the bunker's air conditioning was broken and Commander Jack Reyes refused to plan the defense of the species while sweating. He stood before the assembled generals, admirals, and one extremely tired UN Secretary-General, wearing his flight jacket over regulation blues, and gestured at a holographic display of 10,000 incoming warships with the calm of a man ordering breakfast. "Ladies and gentlemen, the good news: they sent everything. Their whole fleet. Which means," he clicked to the next slide, which read in 72-point font, "Operation Yippee-Ki-Yay, they've never fought anyone who watches movies." General Okafor pinched the bridge of her nose. "Jack, 12 billion lives are riding on this. Tell me there's more than a die-hard reference." "There's more." Reyes's grin faded, and for a moment the room saw the other man underneath, the one who'd spent 3 years on Mars Station listening to the dark, the one whose sister was on Luna Colony directly in the invasion corridor, the one who'd read every intercepted Vrexnath conquest record twice and hadn't slept properly since. "They've won 4,000 wars, but look at how. Every species they crushed fought rational, preserved their fleets, protected their assets, surrendered when the math turned." He tapped the hologram, scattering light across his knuckles. "Nobody's ever fought them stupid. Stupid is where humanity is undefeated. And Phase 1, the Secretary General asked. Reyes's grin came back like a sunrise. Phase 1, ma'am, is a love song. 60 million kilometers away, the Vrexnath Armada dropped out of jump space above Mars in perfect crescent formation. A formation refined over millennia to inspire despair, its geometry calculated to trigger submission responses in most vertebrate brains. High Admiral Zixthala stood on his dais and awaited the traditional wailing of the doomed. "Open all channels," he commanded. "Let them beg." Every channel opened. And Earth was already broadcasting. It hit the fleet across every frequency at once. Military bands, civilian bands, the sacred command channel reserved for the Admiral's own voice. A drumbeat. A synthesizer, bright and shameless. And then a young male human promising, with devastating sincerity, that he was never going to give them up. "What is this?" Zixthala demanded. "Silence it." The communications officer stabbed at his console. "I cannot, High Admiral. It is coming from everywhere. 6,000 relay drones. Civilian satellites. They have converted their entire planetary broadcast grid into," he swallowed, "into this. Firewall it." "The firewall is humming it, High Admiral." At the intelligence station, analyst Vrethka closed all 6 eyes in something between horror and vindication. 17 cycles she had carried this melody alone, a patient zero of joy, and now she listened to it colonize her entire civilization's command structure in real time. Around her, officers twitched. Mandibles clicked involuntarily, on the beat. The Warmind itself, ancient annihilator of 4,000 strategies, dedicated an entire processing core to determining why the song resolved to the tonic in such a satisfying way and could not stop. "It is a weapon," Vrethka whispered. "I filed a report." Then Mars Defense opened fire and the actual battle began. It was, by every metric in the Vrexnath tactical database, not a battle. It was a hallucination with missiles. Human fighter squadrons came boiling up out of the Martian gravity well, flying like nothing in 4,000 wars, corkscrewing, drifting, cutting thrust to spin backward and fire while falling. Tactics with no doctrine, no lineage, no sanity. The Warmind attempted to model their maneuvers and returned error after error, because the Warmind had never played a video game, never watched Top Gun 100 times in a barracks, never been 17 years old in a simulator with something to prove. Their squadron designations, High Admiral, the tactical officer reported, voice fraying. Ghost Riders. Red 5. And, I am translating correctly, Rubber Ducky Squadron. What is a rubber ducky? We believe it is a bath toy, High Admiral. Why would they name warriors after a bath toy? Nobody answered, because at that moment Rubber Ducky Squadron threaded the gap between 2 dreadnoughts' overlapping shields, a gap the Warmind classified as suicidally impassable, and put 6 torpedoes into the carrier Endless Hunger while their squadron leader sang along with the planetary broadcast, off-key on an open channel so the aliens could hear. The Endless Hunger had eaten the fleets of 40 worlds. It broke apart above Mars like a toy dropped by a careless god, and across human comms rose a sound the Vrexnath had never heard from an enemy in battle. Laughter. Whooping, delighted, utterly unafraid laughter. Zixthala gripped his dais rail hard enough to crack it. In the intercepted chatter, a human voice bellowed something the translators rendered as, "Get Tio de Chapa," as his damaged fighter tumbled home. Another human requested, mid-dogfight, that someone tell my wife I died doing something awesome. A third was audibly eating a sandwich. "They are not afraid," the Admiral said. It came out quieter than he intended. "No, High Admiral," Vrethka said, and did not add "I told you" because she was 7th of her molt and wished to reach an 8th. "They are outnumbered 50 to 1. Their world is soft, their history is short, they have brought bath toys to a war of annihilation. Why?" And here's something cracked in his voice, some deep foundation stone laid 4,000 conquests ago. "Why are they laughing?" On the main display, the human fighters were withdrawing toward Earth in ragged, joyful formation. Not fleeing, but luring, and every officer on the bridge could see it, and every officer could also see that the Admiral's pride was going to follow them anyway. The song played on. It had been playing for 3 hours. It would, the communications officer now understood with dead-eyed certainty, be playing for the rest of his natural life. Zixthala stared at the retreating fighters, at the wreckage of the Endless Hunger, at the small blue world hanging patient and bright beyond Mars, and the words came out of him before he understood they were in him, writing the melody that had already breached his skull's last defenses, the anthem of this impossible species now hollowing out his empire from the inside. "They gave us up," he whispered, 6 eyes wide with the first fear of his long, terrible life. "They let us down. Analyst, what does it mean?" Vrethka looked at her admiral, infected at last by the enemy's joy and unable to name it, and gave the only honest intelligence assessment of her career. It means, High Admiral, they're never gonna run around and desert us. We are being pursued by prey. And on the bridge of the flagship, 10,000 years of Dominion certainty tilted, groaned, and began, very slowly to a synth-pop beat older than human spaceflight, to fall. The Vrexnath had a word for what happened between Mars and Earth. They invented it 3 days into the pursuit, because no existing word in a 10,000-year-old language of conquest could hold it. Loosely translated, it meant the nightmare that giggles. It began at the asteroid belt. Zixthala committed his monster-class dreadnoughts, the wound in heaven, the grief of stars, 12 leviathans of spine and shadow that had ended civilizations by arriving. They pushed through the belt in wedge formation, sensors sweeping for warships. They were not attacked by warships. They were attacked by rocks. Human mining vessels, squat, ugly, held together by welds and spite, had spent 72 hours rigging mass drivers to asteroids the size of cities. The first 4-billion-ton stone took the grief of stars amidships at 11 kilometers per second, and the intercepted human transmission that accompanied it entered Vrexnath archives verbatim. It's just angry birds, Admiral. Except the birds are 4 billion tons and the pigs are war criminals. What? Zixthala said, watching a dreadnought that had survived the Kesari sun cannons fold around a boulder, is an angry bird? Nobody told him. Nobody on the bridge had slept in 3 days. The song was still playing. Then came Waystation Kepler. The station hung in the belt's shadow, a human refueling depot lightly armed, crewed by engineers. Doctrine was clear: board it, extract intelligence, display dominance. Zixthala dispatched the Talon of the 9th Molt, his elite shock troopers, veterans of 200 boarding actions, creatures of chitin and blade that had never lost a corridor. 40 of them went in. The after-action report, compiled from the survivors' fragmented testimony, was 400 pages long, heavily redacted, and concluded with a single line that would be stamped into Vrexnath military academies for whatever remained of Vrexnath history. Beware of Dave. The humans aboard Kepler had not surrendered. The humans aboard Kepler had improvised. They fought with plasma cutters and pneumatic wrenches, with fire axes and a forklift, in corridors they knew blind and the invaders didn't, venting atmosphere from sections with the cheerful ruthlessness of people who fixed hull breaches for a living. And at the center of it, in the mess hall where the Talon's commander made his final stand, was a maintenance engineer named Dave Kowalski, 51 years old, father of 3, wielding a steel chair. He had taken off his shirt first. The survivors could not explain why this detail mattered. They only agreed unanimously, trembling, that it had. One human, Zixthala said slowly, reading the report a third time. With furniture. The chair was not modified in any way, High Admiral, the tactical officer confirmed hollowly. It was simply a chair. He is quoted as saying, "This is for making me miss my daughter's recital. We have lost the Talon of the 9th Molt." At her station, analyst Vrethka updated her threat model in silence. She had stopped filing reports. She had started keeping a journal. The retreat, though no one dared call it that yet, accelerated past Luna, and that was where the humans deployed what their own transmissions called, with audible glee, psychological munitions. Escape pods, hundreds of them, launched not from dying ships but from perfectly healthy ones, drifting into the Vrexnath formation, broadcasting on all frequencies. Some carried the eternal song. Some carried a looping animation of a pastry-bodied cat trailing rainbows, accompanied by music that the Warmind classified as structurally identical to a mimetic siege weapon. And some, the cruelest, carried 10 unbroken hours of a children's choir declaring that it was, after all, a small world. The crew of the cruiser Devourer of Hope mutinied on hour 6. They did not mutiny to surrender. They mutinied to get away from the pods. And threaded through all of it the thing that finally broke the fleet's spine, the human comm chatter. The Vrexnath monitored enemy communications as doctrine, expecting fear, coordination, desperation. Instead they got trash talk and cackling, pilots rating each other's kills like performances, a gunnery crew arguing about whether a hot dog was a sandwich while firing, and one voice, young, delighted, doing an impression of some ancient human warrior, bellowing, "Get Tio de Chapa," as his crippled fighter spun home to applause. They are not defending their world, Zixthala said. He stood very still at his dais, 6 eyes fixed on the display, and his voice had gone somewhere quiet and lightless. They are enjoying us. We are 10,000 years of terror, and they are treating us like a festival that came to them. High Admiral. His science officer approached the dais the way one approaches a wounded animal. The final xenological assessment is complete. You should hear it standing down. Speak. They are persistence predators. The science officer's plates had gone gray. Before they had tools, they hunted by following. Not faster than their prey, just unwilling to stop. They would walk behind a creature for days until it lay down and died of exhaustion, and then they would eat it, and then they would paint pictures of it respectfully on their walls. This instinct never left them. It is in everything. Their apex predator problem? They followed the wolves until the wolves gave up and became dogs. Fire from the sky? They flew kites into storms until the lightning surrendered and became electricity. Their planet's spiciest plant evolved a chemical weapon specifically to stop mammals from eating it, and the humans ate it on purpose and raided it and hold competitions. He paused. His voice dropped. High Admiral, they got angry at their moon. Some of them decided it was insulting just by being out of reach. So they strapped themselves to guided explosions and went there. 12 of them. And when they arrived, having conquered the heavens at unspeakable cost, they played games and left flags and golf balls. Because even their triumphs are jokes. Conclusion. This species cannot be exhausted, cannot be demoralized, and appears to metabolize fear directly into entertainment. Recommendation. Say it. Run, High Admiral. Recommendation. Run. And so, for the first time in 10,000 years, the Vrexnath Dominion turned its back on an enemy. The order went out coded as a strategic reorientation, but every officer on every one of the 9,000 remaining ships knew the word for it, and somewhere in the fleet someone hummed the song and nobody reprimanded them, because it no longer felt like the enemy's anthem. It felt like the only honest report anyone had filed all week. Vrethka watched the jump drive spool and wrote one line in her journal. We came to annihilate them. They have not once stopped smiling. I begin to suspect these are related. 60 million kilometers behind them, in a Houston cafeteria, Commander Jack Reyes watched 9,000 hostile signatures turn away from Earth, and the room around him detonated, generals hugging, the Secretary General crying into cold coffee, someone spraying champagne over the hologram. Luna Colony was safe. His sister had come to him 20 minutes ago from the tunnels, alive, furious, magnificent. Tell me you're not done with them, Jack. They came to our house. He looked at the retreating fleet a long moment. He thought about 4,000 species who hadn't had a Dave, a rubber ducky squadron, a stupid perfect song. 4,000 species who fought rational and died rational, and had no one left to laugh for them. Reyes drained his coffee, set the mug down with a click that silenced the celebration, and smiled the smile that every Vrexnath survivor would one day describe, in hushed testimony, as the worst thing in the galaxy. Nobody puts Earth in a corner, he said. All fleets pursue. And out in the dark, aboard a flagship fleeing for the first time in its ancient life, High Admiral Zixtala watched his rear sensors bloom with contacts. Hundreds of human ships, mismatched and welded and gleeful, accelerating after his armada like wolves who had finally found something interesting enough to follow, and understood at last with perfect clarity the fate of prey that cannot outrun what will not stop. Humanity was coming with them. On the Vrexnath homeworld, beneath the obsidian dome of the High Council, 13 ancient matriarchs waited for word of glorious victory. They had waited through the silence of the first month, which was tradition. Annihilations took time. They had waited through the second, which was concerning. By the third, the council had begun holding its sessions in whispers, because the last transmission from the fleet had been High Admiral Zixtala's voice, ragged and strange, saying, "They are not shooting at us," in the tone of a creature describing something far worse than being shot at. Then, on the 91st day, a single ship fell out of jump space above the homeworld. It was a scout vessel, the smallest class in the armada, its hull scorched and patched. Patched well, the dockmasters would later note with dread, patched with alloys no Vrexnath forge had ever produced, welded in cheerful, confident seams. It carried one pilot. He was escorted into the council dome between two guards, and the 13 matriarchs leaned forward on their thrones of conquered bone to receive the fate of 10,000 ships. The pilot stood in the center of the vast floor, swaying slightly. His eyes held the light of someone who had seen beyond the veil of the world and found the veil friendly, which was somehow unbearable. First Matriarch Skeleth raised a claw. "Speak, pilot. Where is our fleet?" The pilot opened his mandibles. And in the sacred silence of the High Council of the Vrexnath Dominion, unbroken for 10,000 years, he began, softly, reverently, with a cadence of scripture, to sing. "Never gonna give you up. Never gonna let you down." "He is cursed," hissed the third matriarch. "Never gonna run around, the pilot continued, tears welling in all 6 eyes, and desert you? They questioned him for 9 days. It was the only answer he gave, and by the 4th day 2 of the guards were humming it, and by the 7th so was the 3rd matriarch, and that was how the High Council learned that the curse was real and the curse was load-bearing. It was not a madness the humans had inflicted on the pilot. It was a message the fleet had chosen to send. It was, the Council's lorekeepers finally decoded, trembling, a promise. The truth arrived 2 days later, carried not by a warship but by a data burst the humans transmitted openly, addressed with hideous informality to the folks back home. And the truth was this: the fleet had never been destroyed. The human pursuit had caught the armada at the edge of the solar system. Hundreds of welded, mismatched, gleeful ships running down 9,000 warships like wolves pacing a dying herd. And then, at the moment of the killing blow, the moment 4,000 extinct civilizations had taught the Vrexnath to expect, the humans had done the one thing no doctrine anticipated. They had helped. They boarded the crippled ships not with blades but with toolkits. They patched hulls. They restored air to sections the Vrexnath themselves had written off, pulling gasping enemy crewmen out of vacuum with their own hands and wrapping them in blankets, which turned out to be a human ritual so ancient and unstoppable that the Vrexnath had no defense against it whatsoever. They fixed the wound-in-heavens reactor. They repaired the very dreadnought sent to annihilate them, whistling while they worked, and when a bewildered Vrexnath engineer asked why, a human woman with grease on her face had shrugged and said the words now carved above the Council's own archive door as a warning to all future generations. You looked like you were having a rough one, buddy. Then came the food. The data burst included 40 hours of documentation the humans called, ominously, the welcome dinner. The Vrexnath had subsisted for 10 millennia on nutrient paste optimized for conquest. The humans introduced them to tacos. The footage showed the fleet's most decorated shot commander, a creature whose name meant he who walks in ash, taking one bite of carnitas and going completely still for 11 seconds before asking in a small voice if there were more, and whether it was too late to have lived an entirely different life. It was not too late. That was the horror of it, the 13 matriarchs realized as the data unspooled. That was the weapon under all the other weapons. With humans it was never too late. Half the fleet defected within a month, not through coercion but through cheeseburgers, streaming services, dogs, the wolves. The cuddled wolves, exactly as analyst Vrethka had warned. And something called karaoke night, which allowed a warrior culture to weep openly in public while being applauded for it, and which struck the Vrexnath psyche like a hammer striking exactly the right bell. The remaining half stayed aboard their ships as free crews under a joint command because the humans, and this the Council read 4 times, had not demanded surrender. They had offered citizenship. The papers included a signing bonus and dental. High Admiral Zixthala, the unyielding devourer of the Kesari Reach, 3rd of his molt, had been the last to break. He had locked himself on his command dais for 6 days, refusing food, refusing parley, waiting for the executioners that never came. On the 7th day, Commander Jack Reyes had walked onto the bridge of the inevitable screaming of 1,000 suns alone, unarmed, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and sat down on the steps of the dais like a man with nowhere better in the universe to be. 4,000 species? Zixthala had rasped. I burned 4,000 species. Why am I alive? And Reyes had held up the second cup and given the answer that ended the Dominion not with a bang, but with a beverage. Because killing you ends the war and we don't want the war to end. We want it to turn into something else. That's the thing nobody ever tells you about us, Admiral. Humans don't fight to destroy our enemies. He'd smiled, and Zixthala, who had stared into supernovae, finally understood the human calculus of joy, the perpetual amusement of a species that had domesticated its own apocalypses one by one. We fight until our enemies get comfortable. Now drink your coffee. My sister wants to yell at you personally, and trust me, you don't keep her waiting. The flagship never came home. It hangs in Earth orbit to this day, repainted, refitted, its name changed by planetary referendum, because humanity held a vote and humanity never learns, to the ISS Bodhi McBoat Phase 2. Zixthala lives aboard a retirement habitat off Luna, where he has become, to the eternal disbelief of 13 matriarchs watching his transmissions in stunned silence, the most beloved entertainment critic in 2 civilizations, reviewing human war films with the unimpeachable authority of a former final boss. His review of Independence Day broke every viewership record in Dominion history. It was 2 words long, inaccurate, softer. Analyst Vrethka, 7th of her molt, filed one last report, to Earth, this time with her citizenship papers. It read, I was right about everything. It has never once felt like winning. Recommendation, tacos. She teaches now at the Academy on Mars, and her first lecture every year begins the same way. She plays her students a song from 1987 and tells them it is the most successful weapon in galactic history, because it is the only one that conquers by promising to stay. And so, at the end, there was only the Galactic Council, the trembling federation of every species that had watched the Vrexnath Dominion, terror of 10,000 years, sail into human space and simply never return. They deliberated for a full cycle. They drafted the most careful diplomatic overture in galactic history, begging Earth for terms of peace, and transmitted it to the small blue world with every honorific in every language they possessed. Humanity's official reply arrived in 1 hour. It contained no demands, no terms, no text at all. It was a single video link. The council convened in emergency session. The wisest beings of 400 worlds gathered around one screen, and the eldest of the assembly, ancient beyond reckoning, extended one trembling tendril and clicked. A drumbeat, a synthesizer. A young man in a trench coat began to dance. And as the anthem of humanity rolled out across the galaxy, the promise, the warning, the truth, every species listening finally understood what the Vrexnath had learned too late and too well, that this species does not conquer, does not annihilate, does not stop, and never, ever gives you up. The galaxy had been rickrolled. It would never be alone again.